Hello everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. Today is 16th August 2024 and today we have some important articles for the discussion. And without any further delay, let's discuss all these important articles. And first and foremost, we tried to solve yesterday given prelims practice question. So this was the question that I have given to you. It is about Maasai tribal people recently seen in news, and they are inhabit in which of the following countries, and that is the question. And the correct answer for this question is option D, that Maasai tribal people live in the eastern part of Africa, especially a country called Tanzania and even Kenya also, right? So one of the famous tribes of Africa, and they're in fact nomadic tribal people, and also they belong to the pastoralist community and nomadic community, in the sense that they usually move from one place to another place for the pastures, right? So they are nomadic and pastoralist. Maasai people are a Nilotic ethnic group, and they inhabiting the selected but a large parts of northern, central and southern Kenya, across the border in the northern Tanzania as well. So in Africa, both Kenya and Tanzania, so we could actually find this tribal people, Maasai tribal people. And today's prelims practice question, this is polity. This is from the polity, and this is also a very important question. Which of the following employees are covered by the Central Administrative Tribunal? So this is the question. So options: members of the defense forces, secretariat staff of the parliament, officers and servants of the Supreme Court, and D, none of the above. And try to answer this question in the comment section, and correct answer I'll be providing you in tomorrow's class. And the first article that we are going to discuss is about Prime Minister Narendra Modi's yesterday's speech. So we all knew that we have celebrated Independence Day on August 15 yesterday, and from the ramparts of the Red Fort, Prime Minister Narendra Modi gave a speech, and in this speech Prime Minister has emphasized on a secular civil code, or it is also known as Uniform Civil Code. Now what is this Uniform Civil Code, and what is its importance, and why we need to implement Uniform Civil Code in our country, and what are the challenges in implementation of Uniform Civil Code, we will understand. The context of this article is that the 11th successive Independence Day address from the ramparts of Red Fort for Prime Minister Narendra Modi. We all knew that this is the 11th successive Independence Day address from the Red Fort, and in fact Prime Minister Narendra Modi gave a renewed push for the BJP's ideological aim. So the ideological aim of the BJP is a universal or uniform civil code, or it is also known as a secular civil code. In fact, Prime Minister Narendra Modi mentioned it as a secular civil code, and this Uniform Civil Code is already imbibed or mentioned in the Indian Constitution under Article 44 of the Directive Principles of State Policy. Uniform Civil Code is mentioned. The state should implement Uniform Civil Code. So however, in India as of now, we do not have the Uniform Civil Code, and different religious people and different ethnic groups would be different, would be having different laws. However, Uniform Civil Code ensures all religion, or irrespective of religion, irrespective of race, region, caste, place of birth, everyone would be under one single law, and that is Uniform Civil Code. As of now, we do not have any Uniform Civil Code, but the only state in India which has the Uniform Civil Code, or which has implemented Uniform Civil Code, is Goa. Goa already has a Uniform Civil Code, and one of its judgment, the Supreme Court has asked other states and the Union of India to emulate the Goa model of Uniform Civil Code. In fact, when we talk about the benefits or advantages of the Uniform Civil Code, it helps in ensuring equality before law for all, irrespective of any sort of discrimination. Now what exactly is this Uniform Civil Code? Now when we talk about the Uniform Civil Code, it resonates with one country, one rule, and it should be applied to all religious community. For example, when we talk about Muslims have separate laws for the marriage, divorce, adoption, and all these aspects. And however, Uniform Civil Code mandates that we need to be having one single law. We are living in one country, one rule, and that will be applied to all religious communities across the country, and that is the overall objective of the Uniform Civil Code. And when we talk about the term Uniform Civil Code, we all knew that it is explicitly, not implicitly also, it is explicitly mentioned in part 4 of Article 44. Now, part 4 of the Indian Constitution deals with the Directive Principles of State Policy, and Directive Principles of State Policy, Article 44 of the Indian Constitution states that the state shall endeavor to secure for the citizens a uniform civil code throughout the territory of India. And one thing that we need to understand, the directive principles of state policy are not mandatory for the government, rather they are aspirations that the government must consider in when it comes to the governance and the administration. And directive principles of state policy are also non-justiciable in nature, unlike fundamental rights, they are non-justiciable in nature. For example, if any fundamental rights are violated, people can go for either Supreme Court or High Court for the enforcement of their fundamental rights against the state. But it is, with the respect to directive principles of state policy, it is not the case, because they are non-justiciable in nature. And there are certain suggestions for the implementation of Uniform Civil Code. So if we follow these suggestions, we could implement Uniform Civil Code in this country. So what are those suggestions? They include the progressive and broad-minded outlook among the people and all stakeholders in the country who are concerned with the Uniform Civil Code is very, very important to encourage the people understand the importance and the spirit of Uniform Civil Code. And that is the reason that Uniform Civil Code is enshrined in the Indian Constitution. And for this to be done, or make people broad-minded, make people think progressively, we need to educate and increase awareness, and we should also run the sensitization programs across India, and that will help in people thinking in a broad-minded and progressive manner with respect to the Uniform Civil Code, and that will over a period of time facilitate conditions for the implementation of the UCC across the country. And in fact, the Uniform Civil Code should also be drafted keeping in mind the interests of the all stakeholders and all religions involved. As of now, Muslims and several other religions have been strongly opposing the Uniform Civil Code because it would lead to the generalization of their specific religious laws. However, India, we have a secular principle. Very often these communities have been arguing that Uniform Civil Code is against India's secular principles or India's constitution itself, right? Because secularism guarantees everyone free to practice their own religion, and secularism as an ideal has been enshrined in the preamble of the Indian Constitution through 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act. And apart from that, Article 25 to Article 28 guarantees the right to religion of individuals, and it is also in line with the secular principles of the Indian Constitution. However, in order to implement the Uniform Civil Code, we need to bring in different religions on board, and then we need to build a consensus among all these major religions to implement the Uniform Civil Code in letter and spirit in India. And don't forget, there is a need for a comprehensive overlook about the Uniform Civil Code to take into account different provisions into consideration. For that to happen, an eminent jurist committee should be appointed or constituted, and this committee should maintain or this committee should be given terms such as maintaining uniformity, and also adequate care must be taken not to hurt the sentiments of any particular community or one community, because Uniform Civil Code is a very, very sensitive issue, and there are a lot of fears among different religions and even the ethnic communities also. So therefore, in this context, a committee should be appointed, and the committee should look into every aspect with respect to Uniform Civil Code in a very, very detailed and comprehensive manner. And this committee would also come up with adequate data, and that will help us in formulating the evidence-based policies and data-driven policies, and also help us in building consensus by convincing different communities to implement the Uniform Civil Code over a period of time, because it is in the best interest of our country and best interest of our countrymen. And in fact, the matter is very, very sensitive and a very, very important aspect the Uniform Civil Code. So hence it is always better if the initiative comes from the religious groups concerned. So the religious groups should themselves take initiative and they should themselves start demanding the Uniform Civil Code. For that to happen, there is a need for the consensus among all these major religions. The consensus to happen among these religions, it is very important that people should think about UCC in a broad-minded and in a progressive manner. And a country like India, Uniform Civil Code is very important, and in fact Indian Constitution has also rightly enshrined the implementation of Uniform Civil Code would be the responsibility of the state in the coming days. So since Goa has already implemented and Supreme Court has also time and again called the Indian state to implement the Uniform Civil Code in letter and spirit. However, it is not free from the challenges. There are a number of challenges in the implementation of the Uniform Civil Code. So if you look at the challenges, the task of actually devising a set of rules as part of the Uniform Civil Code, so that actually govern different communities who belong to different religions, is a very formidable and a tedious process and a very difficult process, considering the vast range of interests, sentiments accounted for that. Now when we talk about India is a diverse country. India is a diverse country with different religions and different ethnic communities. Now in this context, it would be very difficult to build consensus about the implementation of the Uniform Civil Code among the diverse communities in India. So because of that reason, it is a very tedious process, and it also takes a longer periods of time to implement the Uniform Civil Code. However, recently the Uttarakhand state government has introduced or published a draft Uniform Civil Code, and such initiatives should be encouraged across the nation. And in fact, there is also a lot of misinformation about the Uniform Civil Code, and this misinformation campaigns should also be curtailed. For example, the Press Information Bureau, working as a fact check unit with respect to misinformation, and this misinformation on the about the Uniform Civil Code should also be tackled. And for that to happen, there is a need for large scale education and awareness campaigns have to be conducted across India, and that will help people formulating an opinion about the Uniform Civil Code, and they would also understand the benefits and the advantages of the Uniform Civil Code. And some people even believe that the government's move to introduce Uniform Civil Code is to Hinduize the Indian society, but this is not the case with the Uniform Civil Code. And in fact, some sections of the minority communities also claim that it is a way of imposing the majority view on them. The majority view is Hindu majority view is imposed on the minorities, and this is the view of some people, and it is largely because of the misinformation that is spread among the people. And apart from that, there is also largely lack of political will because of the vote bank politics. The political parties actually fear that vote bank politics. The political parties fear that they would lose the very important vote bank if they ask for the Uniform Civil Code, despite it is a constitutional direction as part of the directive principles of state policy. So the lack of political will because of the loss of vote bank for these political parties and the complexities involved and sensitivity of the issue, because of all these reasons, there is a lack of political will with respect to the implementation of the Uniform Civil Code. And change in laws in favor of women, like Hindu Inheritance Act, has neither brought about any changes in the percentage of the property held by the woman nor their status. So these things have to be looked into whenever we are implementing the Uniform Civil Code. Now what if, even if we brought Uniform Civil Code and this Uniform Civil Code has not resulted in really governing people under one single law across the country? So therefore these aspects have to be looked into. And in fact, there are a wide variety of religious communities, because we have the religious diversities, and these different religious communities actually have a different personal laws, which would lead to the politicization of the issue, and politicization of the issue will make that this Uniform Civil Code will never be implemented. However, since the constitution and the constitutional framers have envisioned that India should implement a Uniform Civil Code, and it is very important that the center must look into this issue, and center should also build consensus among different religions and different stakeholders to implement Uniform Civil Code in a very near future. And the next important article is with respect to the digital platform to revive solar power scheme. In India, we have been focusing a lot on renewable form of energy resources, and solar energy is one of the renewable form of energy resource. And we all knew that how renewable energy is very very important for a country like India, because 85% of the fossil fuels that we have been importing from other countries. So therefore we have a huge import dependency on our energy resources. And in fact, these fossil fuels releases, because 85% of the energy that we import from other countries releases fossil fuels. They are fossil fuels and they release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and these greenhouse gases would further contribute to the global warming and even lead to the climate change also. And don't forget that in India, more than 50% of the energy is being generated from the thermal power plants. And when we talk about the thermal power plants, these thermal power plants use coal as a raw material in these power plants. So since they use coal as a raw material, coal is also another form of fossil fuel, and when we burn the coal as a fossil fuel, it would also releases greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and that would further contributes to the global warming. And not just global warming, and it also leads to the significantly higher levels of pollution. When we talk about the pollution, nitrous oxide, N2O and sulfur dioxide, particulate matter 2.5 and particulate matter 10, and carbon monoxide. So all these pollutants, ground level ozone also, so all these pollutants are being released into the atmosphere, and they would also causes health related problems among the human beings, and they even causes acid rains. So in this context, it is very important that we need to substantially reduce our dependence on fossil fuels for energy generation, and increasing the amount of energy being produced from the solar power plants is a very very important for India. And don't forget that we also have ambitious targets with respect to generating renewable energy. For example, the Panchamrit commitments that Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced in Glasgow summit, right? So these Panchamrit commitments also mandates that India would generate 50% of its energy resources from non-fossil fuel energy resources, and 500 gigawatt of energy would be generated by India from the renewable sources by 2030, and India would also become net zero by 2070. So in order to achieve all these objectives, it is very very important for India to rapidly make a transition towards the renewable energy resources. And solar power scheme or solar power, increasing emphasis and focus on solar power is one such. And in fact, if we look into the data with respect to the solar power generation in India, so as of June this year, only 256 megawatt of power plants and 3.97 lakh solar pumps and 13,500 solarized pumps so have been installed in India, right? So this is the data with respect to the solar power in India with respect to the agriculture sector. However, this low uptake has actually forced the government to push the scheme's deadline to 2026, because government has already launched a scheme called PM Kusum scheme, right? So when we talk about PM Kusum scheme, so it is Pradhan Mantri Kisan Urja Suraksha Evam Uttam Mahabhiyan, right? So the government will give subsidized solar power pump sets to the farmers, and that will help farmers achieve self-reliance with respect to the energy production. And farmers will not rely on the conventional sources of energy to irrigate their fields, and increase the farmers' income by reducing their input cost is one of the objective of PM Kusum program. So under this PM Kusum program, as of now, only 256 megawatt of power plants and 3.97 lakh solar pumps and 13,500 solar pumps have been installed across India. So however, it is not up to the mark or not up to the desired levels of installation of solar pump sets or solarized pumps in India. So in this context, the government has further pushed the deadline of the scheme to 2026 to cover more and more farmers and to generate more and more electricity from the renewable resources like solar in Indian agriculture, so thereby making Indian agriculture green, sustainable, reduce input cost, and also increasing the farmers' income. Now what is this PM Kusum program? So this PM Kusum program is a 34,000 crore is the financial outlay of this particular program, and this program has been launched to improve the solar energy infrastructure in the agriculture sector across India. So this is the key objective of the PM Kisum program with the financial outlay of 34,000 crore rupees. And in fact, states are also they began experimenting with the alternative approaches to improve the adoption of the solar power plants or solar pump sets. So as I have already told you that when farmers install the solar pump sets, so it would result in reducing the input cost on the part of the farmers, and farmers could also reduce dependence on the conventional energy. And in fact, reduction in the input cost on the agriculture would also help farmers increase their incomes. So therefore it provides income security for the farmers, and in fact it makes agriculture more and more green and sustainable, and in fact it would bring more and more land under irrigation. Because if you talk about India, more than 70% of India's land is rain fed. We do not have adequate irrigation facilities. So in this context, it is very important to launch schemes like PM Kusum, which could actually improve the irrigation facilities and bring in more land under irrigation, and that would also ensure food security of India's population in particular and global population in general. And apart from that, it would also income the farmers incomes as well, and it would also arrest the migration. The rural urban migration would be arrested by this particular scheme. And in fact, it envisages 100 gigawatt setting up or establishing 100 gigawatt of solar power plants in farmer owned land, and installing 14 lakh solar pumps and solarizing 35 lakh grid connected agriculture pumps. So this is the objective of PM Kusum program. So however, it is not free from the challenges. The scheme has been facing a lot of challenges per se. The solar energy installation in India has been facing a number of challenges, because when we talk about installation of solar panels in the agriculture land, there is unavailability of suitable land to install, because when we are planning to install solar panels on a huge or large spaces, it requires a huge land area. So however, there is unavailability of suitable land, and solar power in India has actually grown on large scale solar utility projects which are in Gujarat and Rajasthan. Now when we talk about Gujarat and Rajasthan, these two states have a huge arid and semi-arid area, and this area is generally not cultivable, or it is not under cultivation. So therefore availability of huge land made it possible that the private and the governments have established a huge solar power projects. And therefore in India, most of the solar power is being generated from the utility scale power projects instead of small scale power projects, or even the rooftop solar panels installation or solar power generation is also very less in India. So in this context, so both Gujarat and Rajasthan, there is a huge patches of land, huge tracts of land is available, and most of the land which is available in these two states is also uncultivable or not suitable for the agriculture. So because of that reason, there are a large scale utility scale solar power projects or solar power hybrid projects have actually established in both these states. However, when we talk about the agriculture land, this agriculture land is often a challenge because we require a large land to generate solar energy. However, it is very difficult to find parcels of land that can be pooled together and even made available to a power project developer. So that is one of the reason. However, the government has been trying to leverage the technology of drones, because drones can be used to survey the land which is available, and once drone survey is done, the solar panels can be installed in the agriculture land, and sufficient solar energy can be generated once we install solar panels with the private partnership, and also involving farmers as a stakeholders or important stakeholders. So therefore, developing a digital platform, and this particular digital platform will use digital technology to map land parcels. These drone technology will actually map all the land parcels and will also identify the suitable land for the generation of solar energy across different parts of the country, and that will help the government establish the solar panels in those lands to generate a large scale energy, and that energy can be used by farmers collectively. And this digital platform will help in tracking the scheme's progress in real time basis, and it would also allow the prompt corrective actions, and it also provides a level of oversight. And all these things are very important for successful deployment of large scale solar projects in the Indian agriculture sector, where delays and mismanagement can have a significant repercussions. So however, it is good that technology is used to find out solutions for various problems that we have been facing. However, in order to improve the capacity to generate more and more energy through the installation of solar panels and utilizing the sun's energy to generate sustainable and green energy, technology can be used in the future. All right, so that is a welcome initiative on the part of the government. And the next important article is, so Indian scientists have made important strides with respect to finding out the amplitude of next solar cycle, right? So astronomers from an institute called Indian Institute of Astrophysics, so they have recently found that discovered a new method, and that new method would predict the amplitude of upcoming solar cycles. Now, solar cycles are the phenomenons of space which are associated with the sun, which could have significant repercussions for different infrastructure or the communication systems on the planet Earth. So if the solar cycle is higher, then it would have significant repercussions for the weather weather on the planet Earth, communication systems on the planet Earth, satellites which are revolving around the planet Earth, and even the energy grids failure can also be because of the increased amplitude of the solar cycles. However, it is important that Indian Institute of Astrophysics scientists astronomers have actually found out that a new method, and using this new method, they could actually predict the amplitude of upcoming solar cycles. And besides their research, it can also help in space weather forecasting, and space weather forecasting is very, very important to protect the satellites which are revolving around the planet Earth, and at the same time protecting scientists in the International Space Station. Now we will try to understand what is this solar cycle and why the solar cycles are very important a weather phenomenon for planet Earth. And we all knew that sun is a star, and around sun different planets revolve, and sun is a star, and in fact it is a huge ball of electrically charged hot gas, and sun has a lot of hot gas, and this gas is electrically charged, and this electrically charged a huge gas actually moves, and it would generate a powerful magnetic field around the sun. And in fact, the sun's magnetic field goes through a cycle, so there is a proper cycle of this magnetic field on the planet on the star sun, and this magnetic field's cycle is called as solar cycle, and this magnetic field is generated by the electrically charged gas, and this electrically charged gas moves throughout the sun, and that would result in generation of powerful magnetic field, right? So this powerful magnetic field actually have a cycle, and this is called as solar cycle, right? So how can we track the solar cycle? So it can be tracked by counting the number of sunspots which are present on the sunspots which are present on the sun. So in the beginning of solar cycle, it is called as solar minimum, right? So it is called with the name solar minimum in the beginning of this solar cycle, or when the sun has a least sunspots. So sunspots are not at all visible, and that is known as solar minimum, and when sunspots are clearly visible, it is known as solar maximum, right? So over time, the solar activity and the number of sunspots would increases, and increased number of sunspots would be clearly visible on the surface of the sun, and it is known as solar maximum. When there are no sunspots, it is known as solar minimum. So the middle of the solar cycle is the solar maximum, or when the sun has the most number of these sunspots. And as the cycle coming to an end, it fades back to the solar minimum, right? So it is since a cycle, so there will be solar minimum and solar maximum, and then it coming back to the solar minimum also, right? So a new cycle would actually begins. However, the giant eruptions on the sun There are giant eruptions on the part of the sun, sometimes because it is an electrically charged gas that is filled in on this star. So therefore giant eruptions on the sun, such as solar flares and coronal mass ejections, that usually takes place. So both these coronal mass ejections and solar flares, and they actually increase their intensity, and the frequency would actually increase during the solar maximums, and that would pose potential challenges, or that would also result in powerful bursts of energy and material into the space, and that is where the Earth's communication systems would face serious problems because of the coronal mass ejections and solar flares. And in fact, the activity have effects on the planet Earth also. What sort of activity, what sort of effect that these solar flares and even coronal mass ejections would actually have on the planet and its communication system. For example, eruptions can actually cause lights in the sky, and this phenomenon is called as aurora, or it can even impact the radio communications on the planet Earth. And radio communications is very important phenomenon of of the planet in a globalized world. And even extreme eruptions on the part of on sun, as a result of solar maximum or maximum number of sunspots, extreme eruptions can even affect the electricity grids on the planet Earth also. However, over a period of time, scientists have been working hard to improve their ability to predict the amplitude, predict the strength, duration of these solar cycles, so that we could actually protect infrastructure on the planet Earth. And these predictions can actually help them forecast these solar conditions, and even also help predicting the space weather, thereby extending protection to our scientists. However, the forecasting of solar cycle can help scientists to protect our radio communications on the Earth, and they also help in protecting the power grids, and also they help keep NASA satellites and astronauts safe too in the International Space Station. So because of all these significant benefits, so this discovery of new method by the astronomers of Indian Institute of Astrophysics is very important, because they could actually find out the amplitude of these solar eruptions. Right, so when we talk about space weather, what exactly is the space weather? So space weather is actually the main component of the space weather are solar winds and coronal mass ejections and solar flares. So these are the main components, three main components of the space weather, and they could actually impact or create problems for the communications, satellites and astronauts, International Space Station, so everything. However, so they can actually compress the magnetosphere of the planet Earth, and they could also trigger a large scale geomagnetic storms, right? So, and these large scale geomagnetic storms can actually have wide ranging and harmful effects on the planet Earth, because they could actually affect the communication and weather transmission, and they also damages the spacecraft electronics in the space, and they also threaten the lives of the astronauts who are in the International Space Station. So however, as of now, astronomers have been using many different ways, and these ways can be used to forecast the strength of the next solar cycle. But this method of Indian astronomers is very helpful to predict the solar flares or coronal mass ejections or solar cycles more accurately, or amplitude of solar cycles more accurately. So in this context, when we talk about the number of sunspots, the width of the supergranule cells on the solar surface, right? So there are actually sunspots or supergranule cells on the solar surface, and the width of the supergranule cells on the solar surface during the minimum year of the solar cycle is related to the number of sunspots which could be seen during the subsequent solar cycle maximum. So we could actually understand by looking at solar minimum, so we can understand how many how would be the impact of sun flares and coronal mass ejections. So what is its intensity and frequency, so once the solar cycle reaches to the solar maximum. And this simple method can be used in space weather forecasting, and space weather forecasting forecasting is very important to protect our communication systems, radio communication, astronauts, international space station, and the electronics of the spacecrafts, and even a lot of our satellites, right? So next article is a very important article. So it is with respect to air pollution in India. And in fact, India is a country which has been facing one of the worst and highest levels of air pollution across the world, right? So we have metropolitan cities like Delhi, Hyderabad, Mumbai, Kolkata. So in all these cities there are highest and worst levels of air pollution, and air pollution has also been claiming the lives of the millions of people every year. And apart from that, we have been using substantially higher levels of fossil fuels. And fossil fuels, in the beginning I've told you that the fossil fuels are associated with the release of not just the greenhouse gases, but they also release enormously higher amounts of the pollutants into the environment. So these pollutants would have a serious impact on the health of the human beings. It not just degrade the environmental health, but they also degrade the health of the human beings. However, so traffic congestion and most of the vehicles run on fossil fuels. All these factors have been causing significantly higher levels of air pollution. Now when we talk about this article very briefly, a recent report about the air pollution in India stated that India is actually home to 83 of world's 100 most polluted cities. So you can imagine the intensity and the quantum of air pollution in India, because so if you take 100 most polluted cities across the world and 83 are in India alone. So another report from the British Medical Journal has also estimated that air pollution is one of the leading causes of death of people. And air pollution in India has been leading to 2.1 million people deaths every year, and this is a very high number. And in fact it is the second largest numbers after China, because China has the highest number of people who are being died because of the air pollution. And in fact 99% of the population in India breathes air that is poorer than the recommended standards of World Health Organization. So you can understand the intensity and the quantum of the problem of air pollution in India. Now what exactly is this air pollution? So we will try to define this air pollution in a very simple manner. Now air pollution is actually a contamination of indoor or outdoor environment by chemical, physical or biological agent. So any of such agents can actually pollute or contaminate the fresh air or the clean air, and that would actually modify the natural characteristics of the atmosphere, and that would further cause the harm to the human health. And that is a very simple and a brief definition of air pollution. And in fact, what are the sources of air pollution? So they include the combustion devices, household combustion devices, motor vehicles which uses fossil fuels, and industrial facilities, so which actually indiscriminately releases pollutants, and forest fires. And apart from forest fires, a very important phenomenon, that is stubble burning. Stubble burning is also another important aspect which has been resulting in the release of the harmful pollutants into the environment. Now how severe is the problem of air pollution in India? Now according to data from International Energy Associate, it has estimated that 12%, at least 12% of India's total CO2 emissions are due to the road transportation, right? So not just it is with respect to carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, but it is not a pollutant in India. So not just in India, across the world it is not a pollutant, but rather there are particularly pollutants like particulate matter 2.5, particulate matter 10, and carbon monoxide, and even sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxide. So all these are major pollutants, and most of these pollutants are being released from the road transportation, and vast majority of the particulate matter 2.5 are due to the heavy vehicles. Now what happens, these particulate matter 2.5 are very fine and small grains, and they would easily deposit in human lungs, and they would easily travel through the blood of human beings. So therefore over a period of time it causes several negative problems for the human beings. And in fact the particulate matter 2.5 specifically comprises pollutants which, by being microscopic, and they are very microscopic, and they can actually reach the deepest parts of our lungs, and they would settle in human lungs, and they could also spill over to the blood among human beings, and thereby causing a wide range of respiratory and even the cardiovascular effects also for the human beings. And in fact, so when we talk about the nitrous oxide is also one of the most dangerous and most harmful pollutant, and it contributes to the formation of ground level ozone. Now ground level ozone is another very harmful gas at the ground level, and this could also impacts the air quality, and it impacts the heat of that particular area, and that further fuels the air pollution in these urban areas, right? So in cities like Delhi, you could easily experience or higher levels of ground level ozone and several other pollutants, because so if you roam in those cities for even 5 to 10 minutes, you would automatically feel there is some kind of itching in your eyes and headache. So all these feelings, all these sense in Delhi, it is because of the air pollution, right? So heavy vehicles contribute to about 60 to 70% of the total particulate matter emissions, and even about 40 to 50% of the total nitrous oxide emissions in urban areas are mostly due to the heavy vehicles and in the Indian transportation sector. Now, what are the measures that the government has already taken to combat air pollution? There are a number of measures that the government has taken, but the most important measure is the Bureau of it comes from the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, and Bureau of Energy Efficiency actually launched an initiative to draft corporate average fuel economy. So this is also known as CAFE, corporate average fuel economy norms for cars in India for timely and laudable, because it would ensures energy efficiency in Indian transportation sector, and that would further reduces the pollution into the environment, and that would further reduces the emission of greenhouse gases. So therefore it is a welcome, timely and a laudable step taken by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. However, the timelines to implement the corporate average fuel economy from 2027 to 2032 and K4 from 32 to 37 are practical, and once we implement them, we could substantially reduce the emissions into the atmosphere. However, the commitment of the government to shift to the modified India driving cycle to the world light duty vehicle testing procedure from March 31st 2027 is also one of the very important and a very significant measure that the government has undertaken, because it is very important, because the world light duty vehicle offers a more accurate and globally harmonized measure of vehicles actual fuel consumption, and actual fuel consumption data is very important from the perspective of pollution, from the perspective of emissions contributed by the vehicles. So therefore, India shifting towards world lightweight vehicle testing procedure is one significant aspect. And in fact, this corporate this CAFE norms exclude emissions by heavy vehicles such as trucks, lorries and other freight vehicles. And in fact, the government has also introduced the vehicle scrappage policy, and this vehicle scrappage policy has introduced because the old vehicles would release more emissions. They also the major contributor of pollutants into the environment. So therefore, the government has introduced the vehicle scrappage policy to phase out these old vehicles, because old vehicles are very often polluting vehicles, including the heavy vehicles also in the year 2022. However, so as per the vehicle scrappage policy, the passenger vehicles which are older than the 20 years and the commercial vehicles which are older than 15 years, so they must pass a fitness and emissions test. And this fitness and emission test is a very, very important aspect, because so if those vehicles don't pass the fitness and emission test, so that essentially means that those vehicles would not be fit for the transportation, because they would release a lot of emissions and also pollutants into the environment, right? So under this, those vehicles which are old and which fail to pass the fitness and emission test would be scrapped, and certain amount of subsidy would also be given to the vehicle owners to purchase another new vehicle. So however, the existing policies of the government, these policies particularly aimed at tackling or combating air pollution, such as testing vehicles at the regular intervals to understand the fitness and their emission standards, and also it ensures within this is in the emission limits, and banning open garbage burning and checking industrial emissions to be implemented with the greatest stringency. And in fact, with respect to stubble burning also, the government has been thinking over the idea of converting the stubble into small pellets and generating energy from the pellets, thereby increasing income of the farmers, and at the same time managing stubble in a sustainable manner that could substantially reduces the air pollution levels in India, right? So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. If you like our work, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.